I'm Roberta Matuson. I am the president of Matuson Consulting, and I'm known globally as the talent maximizer. I help organizations create workplaces where employees love to work and customers love to do business. And you're watching the Dove Baron Leadership and Loyalty Show. On today's show, I'm going to share some secrets from my new book, The Magnetic Leader. And if you listen in, I guarantee within 7 days, you too can become a magnetic leader.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dove Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dove Baron, is the founder of FullMontyLeadership.com. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dove Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire.
Welcome, dear friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. Thank you for joining us here on this episode of Dove Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series, where today we're going to look at one of my favorite subjects, how to become a magnetic leader. If you're a new listener, new viewer, thank you for joining us. Strap yourself in, we're about to go full Monty. If you're a regular, big thank you to you for making us the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 listeners globally. We're honored to have you as part of the show, and thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know, because we were honored and extremely grateful to Inc. magazine, who cited us as the #1 podcast to make you a better leader. GNA also cited us as in the top 10 podcasts for HR pros and managers. So again, thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Remember, we always need your help in staying relevant, so please get over to iTunes, rate, review, and subscribe to the show. All right, let's strip it down and dive right in. Watching and listening to this show, you're either a senior, a high-level executive, an entrepreneur, a sales leader, or a leader in some capacity, and as such, there's likely been times when you were looking to find great people and there just didn't seem to be anybody around. Other times, it's difficult to keep the great ones. However, there comes a point where we, as leaders, must be really honest with ourselves, and we've got to shift the pointing of the fingers and looking to blame that talent pool, and instead take a look in the mirror at how we are leading. Well, our guest today on this episode is Roberta Matuson. Let me try that again. Matuson. Help me out.
Well, it's Roberta Matuson.
Matuson. Our guest today is Roberta Matuson. She's the author of the highly acclaimed Suddenly in Charge, Managing Up, Down, and Succeeding All Around. And her new book, a brand new book, is called The Magnetic Leader, How Irresistible Leaders Attract Employees, Customers, and Profits. She's a highly sought after thought leader who's known for her ability to dramatically accelerate workforce productivity and profitability. She is the CEO of Matuson Consulting, a firm who is known for the unique ability to leverage intergenerational workforce differences into opportunities. Roberta was recently inducted into a prestigious $1 million Consulting Hall of Fame. Roberta is also a leadership expert for Monster, BostonWorks, which is a division of Boston Globe, and she's a top expert blogger for Fast Company and Forbes. She is featured absolutely everywhere. Her insights have been featured on Fox News, CBS Early Show, Fox Business. She's frequently quoted in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Bloomberg, Business Week. The list keeps going on. New York Times, USA Today. And she is one of a handful of people who've actually appeared as a guest on Bill O'Reilly on Fox. Yes, and she left unscathed. And we won't say untouched because we don't know that yet. But she is very prolific. She's worked. Her stuff has been published in Pink Magazine, in the Daily Telegraph in Britain, British Airways, Business Life, Globe and Mail. Her work is frequently featured in Career Builder, BNet, HR.com. I mean, just about everywhere. As I said, she's the author of a brand new book called The Magnetic Leader, How Irresistible Leaders Attract Employees. customers, and profits. So ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and welcome Roberta Matuson. Woo! Are you ready? Come on. Everybody's clapping. Woo!
Thank you.
Take a bow, Roberta. They're not going to let you sit down so you can take a bow. Thank you. There you go. Good to have you here.
Oh, it's terrific to join you. I'm exhausted after hearing that introduction.
It's long.
It is. I think I should retire. I'm done.
You've done a couple of things. So we were speaking off air about how you've got 2 books coming out this year, not 1. And we were talking about how writing a book it's a long process, and people think, a lot of people think writing a book is a massive job, and it is. Writing 2 at the same time, while writing all these articles, while being featured, while speaking, while consulting, I'm exhausted just thinking about what you're doing. And you've built a house too.
Yes.
So really, you've just got a lot of time on your hands.
I do. And that's why you and I are talking today.
That's exactly it. So first of all, tell us about being introduced into this prestigious $1 Million Consulting Hall of Fame. That's quite the honor. Tell us about that.
It is absolutely an honor. There are probably about 25 people in the world who are part of this group, and I was nominated and selected, and it was sort of like being crowned Miss Universe in my world. So,
yeah, but you didn't have to wear a bathing costume or say how you're going to save the world.
Well, I didn't say that. That's how I got in.
Right, that's it. That's actually how you get in. You've got to be sending your bathing costume photograph.
Exactly.
So, sort of, let's go back in time a little bit, because you were promoted into the executive suite at 24 years old. You were promoted into that position, in a C-suite position at 24. And we're seeing certainly more of that happening today than we certainly did 10, 15, 20 years ago. But one of the things that happened for you, which I think is still happening a lot of the time, is you weren't given the proper training. Talk to us a little bit about that, because I feel like that's something that many leaders today are feeling. They're having to promote somebody. They don't feel like that person's really ready. And the person who's being promoted doesn't feel that they're ready. Talk to us a little bit about what that experience was like for you and what the lessons are there.
Well, there were so many lessons that I wrote the book Suddenly in Charge based on that. Mm-hmm. And basically what happened was that I went into work one day only to find out that my boss had been fired the night before. And so I did what I thought any other 24-year-old would do. I asked for her job. And they were crazy enough to give it to me. And so, you remember probably being 24. Lots of people on here may remember, or they may be 24. And when you're 24 years old, you think you know everything. Mm-hmm. And I was no different. And cool. So I did so much damage, I can't even tell you. And I actually wrote an apology. If you Google it on BNET, and it's called An Apology from a First-Time Boss. And I apologized for everything I'd ever done to my people. And one of them actually wrote me back, and here's what she said. She said, Roberta, you really weren't that bad. I knew I was really that bad. Yeah. And so since then, I've been on this mission to make sure that leaders don't create these experiences for their people that are so memorable that they never recover.
Wow.
So that's really where I'm at in my journey here. I'm just trying to make sure that people don't ever suffer like I did and what I did to those people.
Right. So obviously that spurred a lot for you, and no one has written more on the subject of talent than you. I named off that massive list. Is that born of the fact that you started out so young and that you were sort of thrown in the deep end and didn't know what the heck you were doing?
Absolutely. I mean, look, if I knew then what I know now, I mean, I would have asked for a coach. I would have said, I need help. I need a coach. I did take it upon myself to go back to school. I got my MBA at night. And the more I learned, the more I realized that I, honest to God, did not have any clue what I was doing. Because when you're in school, whether it's graduate or undergraduate, there are very few real classes on how to be a manager. And so, I learned the hard way. And there's a lot of mistakes I made that I don't think other people need to make in order to learn them. Mm-hmm. And that's why I wrote The Magnetic Leader. That's why I wrote Suddenly in Charge.
So, you and I both know that people don't, generally speaking, people don't leave companies, they leave bosses. There's a whole bunch of Gallup research on that that's global, and that, they call them, in the Gallup poll, I think they're called bosses from hell. And a lot of people have had that, and you and I, in the work that we do, we meet people all the time who love the company, but
right.
want to kill the boss, or there's that person who's in the way. And so when it comes to that, there seems to be this big picture thing, which is, companies look at, say, Google, and they go, yeah, we need more perks, we need more table tennis tables or foosball, and we need a cappuccino machine. But they don't bother to actually work on the leaders, to have the leaders become, quote, as you said, by the title of your book, magnetic. And I think that that's a huge problem. Talk to us about this issue between thinking that the thing that is going to keep the great people with us is perks rather than leadership.
Well, here's what I have to say about that. All the free beer in the world is not going to make your employees, drunk enough and happy to stay and continue to work for a lousy boss. And I've seen it time after time after time. I mean, one day you wake up, maybe it's in a year from now, maybe it's 2 years, 10 years, and you realize, all these free snacks are making me fat. It's great that I'm getting 3 meals a day, but I can never leave my office before midnight. I mean, all of this craziness. And I work for a boss who, quite frankly, is a bit of a jerk.
Right.
So, as you mature and you get in your mind, like, I don't want to do this anymore. We're seeing that right now. There are so many employees sitting in company departure lounges right now. They are waiting to take the next flight out.
Yeah, it's one of the things when I work with companies, because as you and I spoke about, that my last book, Fiercely Loyal, was about the same subject. How do we find, keep, and train, and keep the top talent? And one of the shocking statistics for people is that 40% of your workforce right now, today, your best people, 40% of them are already on the way out. They're already thinking about where to go next. And that's if you're a decent boss. That's if you're good.
And, I think that number's low.
You do? Yeah, I would agree with you. So you've got a bunch of them who are ready to go because that's just part of their evolution and their growth. But you're turbocharging them out of the office if you don't know how to lead.
Exactly, and it's interesting because I just wrote this special report, which I'm happy to share with your listeners, on poaching talent, and it's all about how easy it is today for an employer to steal other people's talent because people are so unhappy. But on the other side, in that report, I write about how do you create this force field around your company to prevent people from plucking out your superstars. So, if they want to just reach out to me at Roberta@MatusonConsulting.com, it's free. My gift to them. I think it's a really important topic to pay attention to.
Awesome. Give us that. Give us your email again, where to get it, because that's a really great gift. Thank you.
It's Roberta@Matuson, MATUSON, consulting.com.
Fabulous.
It's subject line, Dove sent me, and it's yours.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's really cool. That's excellent. So, the title of your book is about being the magnetic leader. And I think that one of the things that's a really important piece of this, and this is one of the things that when I go into a company, I talk about, that being magnetic is an important thing, but the demonstration is if you hold a magnet, one side repels and one side attracts. It's not an attraction, it's a repulsion as well. And we describe it as a magnet and a filter, meaning it's going to push away the wrong people, but it's going to attract the right people. But you, the leader, have to be the magnet. And so talk to us a little bit about that, about pulling the right people and pushing the wrong people.
That's a really great question, because, it's great that you can attract people, but if they're not the right people, that's not so great. It really comes down to being the kind of leader that is authentic. I mean, I write in the book about the 7 traits of magnetic leaders, and I interviewed dozens of people who I consider magnetic leaders. And the common, when I would say, well, what comes to mind when I ask you, when I say the words magnetic leader, most of them would say, authenticity.
Yep.
And if you think about it, it's like, how often in our lives do we get to work with somebody who is really, truly authentic? I mean, I can think of one person that I've worked with. And that's really being, who you are and not trying to be like just like your boss, who, by the way, happens to be a jerk as well. It's really being yourself, but being yourself in a way that people find appealing.
But here's the thing around authenticity, and it's one of my central speaking subjects is authenticity. It's what got me started in the speaking world. The challenge with authenticity, even the language of it, and we've addressed this several times on the show, is that everybody's authentic. And if you ask them, they will, because everybody believes they're authentic. Right?
They think they are.
Right, that's my point. So that nobody's objective in their own subjective reality. So you can't go up to somebody and say you're inauthentic, because they will look at you like, they've no understanding of what you're talking about. Because so many of us, particularly, are trained to go into leadership roles, and we step into the role and we think that the role is us, and we've not made the separation. And the authenticity is, who am I without the role, and can I bring me to the role? So in that context, Roberta, how do we help those leaders? How do you help those leaders in revealing to themselves that they're being inauthentic? Because that's a delicate matter. That's like saying, listen, you've got a big ass zit on the end of your nose that you haven't noticed, that's quite a horn, and they're going, oh, really? So how do you get them to see that inauthenticity? Because it's not apparent to the person who is inauthentic.
So here's how I do it, because I do a lot of advising and executive coaching. And when I'm working with my clients, I start by using myself as the example. I'm from New York, okay? And when you're from New York, typically you're pretty direct. And I lived in Houston. I lived in the South for 9 years. And I tried my best to be sweet and, slow down and be someone who I really, really wasn't being authentic. I mean, it was impossible to take that piece out of me. And so I use myself as an example. And, I say, well, one of the reasons you and I work so well together, because we've agreed that we want to work together, right? Because it has to be a fit, is because I'm direct. And if I wasn't direct, then that wouldn't be very authentic. So here's an example. So let's talk about what you're doing. These are areas where you really shine, yet you don't allow yourself to present yourself in that way to your people. So let's talk about how you might be able to make those changes. Because your people really, they don't want your BS.
No, I mean, one of the things that I wrote about in my last book is that, particularly with millennials, I think they have a bullshit meter, the radar, that is so strong, far better than I don't know if it's better than ours was, but it's more verbal. They're more willing to speak about it, and what's more is they're more willing to vote with their feet. They'll get up and walk away. They're not so hanging on tight for the job the way we might have been.
Oh my goodness.
And as a result, if you're inauthentic, they might not even say anything to you, but they just don't ever show up again.
That's right.
And this is what I want to go to some leaders about, is like, you got to get this.
But I think the important piece to really understand, and I say this with my clients as well, I am not for everyone.
No.
I'm really not. And it's the same thing as a leader. Some people are going to love the fact that I don't BS, that I tell it like it is. And other people, they're going to want the California approach, as I call it. And they're going to want it to be a little softer and nicer. And, and that's okay. They're probably better off working with someone else. Or as a leader, they may need a different kind of leader. But I'm not going to be that soft-spoken, oh, would you please do this? Do you mind? That's just not who I am. But the people who worked for me later on in my career, so they really appreciated the fact that I was truthful. I never gave them BS. They always knew where they stood. So it's about finding your authenticity and then making sure the people you hire are a good fit for that.
Of course. Absolutely. So talk to us about some of the other of your 7 irresistible traits of a magnetic leader. So we got the first one down, which is authenticity, and that's something that people need to explore. So what else?
Oh, a huge one is transparency. I've seen so many leaders who just downright, lie. I mean, and here's an example. I write about this in the book, and it's a true story. Everything, like probably with your writing as well, everything is really true. You don't have to make up material because it's in front of you all the time. And a woman that I knew was she was single. She was about to buy her first home. Mm-hmm. And if you any clue as to what housing costs in a major city, it's a huge investment.
Of course.
And she went to her boss, who was the owner, and she must have had this conversation 3 times. She asked him, well, what do you think? I'm going to buy my first house. I'm a little nervous. And he just went right along, said, yeah, I think it's a great idea. And I kid you not, 30 days later, he laid her off. And he laid her off because he couldn't make payroll. And you and I both know that he knew 30 days before that there was a chance he was having some financial problems.
Right.
And a transparent leader and somebody with ethics would have said to her, this is not the best time. Our economy's a little shaky. If I were you, I'd put off that purchase. So she went ahead, bought the house. 30 days later, was unemployed, the only breadwinner.
Right.
She didn't have a spouse or mom and dad helping her out, and it was the scariest time in her life. And that to me is like completely unacceptable.
But this is an interesting thing, because transparency, one of my things is transparency, but the expansion of that, which is vulnerability. And so a lot of those leaders in the position of that boss you just talked about would say, it's nobody else's business. This is my business. And I don't have control of other people's decisions. They're going to, in their own personal life, and they let themselves off the hook with this stuff. And they see being that transparent as a sign of weakness. How do we get them to go to be, well, the only word for me is more ethical and more integral. How do we get them to see that there isn't a separation, that we have to be human as much as we have to be the leader?
Well, I would go back to, that story and say, what if she had been your daughter?
Yeah.
And you didn't have the financial means to help her out, and her boss just did this. I mean, there were 100 different ways he could have said it, and without appearing to be weak. And all he could have even said is, I think this is a very funky economy, and right now, I think the prices of homes are even going to go even lower. So why don't you hold off? I think that's even a better financial decision, because she was seeking his advice.
Right.
And he sent her right down that rabbit hole. And I see bosses do that all the time. You'll come in and you'll say, oh, we're thinking about buying a new car, my wife and I, right? We're thinking about buying a new car, brand new, Lexus, top of the line. And the boss is like, awesome. And he knows your performance stinks. And he knows he's not giving you a raise and you're not getting your bonus. And here you are all excited. You're going to make this huge, payment. And, a strong magnetic boss would say, I think you need to just stop right here because we have something else to talk about. Before you make any investments, you really want to hear what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
And they don't do it because they don't like conflict.
Well, that's where I'm going to go to. That's my point here, is that from my point of view, where leaders fail is consistently in their lack of ability to deal with conflict. They don't have my language, they don't have the balls, they don't have the courage to embrace conflict. And I mean, you know this as well as I do, maybe even better, that if a leader does not embrace conflict, they're creating resentment, undertone all the time. And that really great leadership requires courage. But people they've got this polarity, which is, if I'm the boss, I have to be an ass and tell you, and not have any humanity, or I've got to be so nice, right? Because I want everybody to love me. And leadership isn't either of those places. Leadership's in the middle, and it is, you have to be transparent, you have to be authentic, and you have to have courage to embrace the conflict that will naturally evolve anyway. And so how do we get them to grasp that? How do we get them to really understand this, Roberta? This is, for me, this is a hair-pulling moment. Sometimes it's like the avoidance.
Well, if you think about it, conflict is actually good and it's healthy.
Absolutely.
If we didn't have conflict, if everyone got into the conference room and said, hey, yeah, that's an awesome idea, even though you're thinking no, and maybe you're launching a new product and it's geared towards baby boomers and you're like, nobody I know would even buy that, but oh, that's a great idea. It's a great idea. It's like some conflict is actually healthy, and it gives you an opportunity to hear different ideas and to build and create innovation. So I'm a huge proponent of that. And I also tell my clients that, leadership is not about being loved. It is about being respected.
Yeah.
I know there were a lot of people who worked for me that would come on this show and tell you I did not love her. But I do believe that they would tell you they respected me and what I was trying to do.
Yeah. It's a vital piece, this piece around conflict, that is so often missed.
And I write about that in The Magnetic Leader. It's like you are going to have periods where there's going to be conflict, and how you manage that conflict will determine your reputation and how others perceive you.
Yeah, but I think that, that there's we all know the saying that people are most afraid of public speaking. That's supposedly the number one fear, and I disagree with that wholeheartedly, because the number one thing that people are afraid of is conflict.
Right.
Because they're afraid of being rejected. But when you learn to face conflict, when you learn that there's such a thing as healthy conflict and how to do that in a way that honors both parties, it just makes you such a better leader.
And you can sleep at night because you're not tossing and turning thinking, oh my God, I have to have this conversation tomorrow. I don't want to have this conversation, So I just think it's a healthier overall lifestyle. And, even in your relationships at home, I mean, I have 2 teenagers. Conflict is all around.
If you have teenagers, it is mandatory.
Exactly.
You better learn some conflict skills if you've got teenagers, because if you don't, they're going to be teaching you some painful lessons.
Right. Or just have a bottle of wine open. One or the other. I don't know. Oh.
Absolutely. What's your new conflict resolution skill? Wine.
Maybe I should give a bottle out with every book.
That's a very good idea, but with a little hook that goes into that section of the book.
Right, and a straw so you can sip.
Exactly. Read this while sipping the wine. Absolutely.
Thank you for that idea. I think I'll do that.
That's your new promotional idea.
Exactly.
Chapter 7. Drink this first.
I like that. I'm writing this down.
Good. So tell us another one of those irresistible traits for leaders.
Well, I would say that another trait is really being a strong communicator. Because when you look at, irresistible leaders, mean, look at Bill Clinton. Whether you loved him as a president or not, whenever he speaks, you're just like, wow, like you just listen. And so, I think strong communication skills are really, really key for people who want to be magnetic leaders. And that's both verbal and written.
Mm-hmm. So what's your advice because I mean, I've been speaking for 34 years, and one of the things I know for sure is there are people on the speaking circuit who have had New York Times bestsellers, who are wonderful authors. They should have stayed authors. Okay,
but you and I have to be real, and we have to share with your listeners how many of these books become New York Times bestsellers. Because it's not what you think.
Yeah, that is also true. But nonetheless, they have become that author. And some of the books are genuinely great books. They're wonderful content. But as speakers, it's kind of like watching paint dry. They don't really have any juice. And I've also seen speakers who are phenomenal speakers, but when they write, it's threadbare. I mean, there's nothing in there.
Correct.
So what's your advice? What's your guidance to somebody who is one of those two camps? So they're a great speaker, but they kind of lack in the writing, or they're great writers, but they lack in the speaking.
Well, I think the way to balance that out is, Marshall Goldsmith, right?
I do indeed.
Marshall, when I was talking to him, he told me he doesn't write his books. He has a writer, his agent writes his books, but he is a phenomenal speaker. I mean, he speaks from his heart. So he knows where his strengths are.
Right.
On the other hand, you've got certain people who I won't name who have New York Times bestsellers because they had like the most views of their TED Talk. And then you go and you buy the book and you're like, I don't understand. I bought the book because before I met Marshall, I had no idea that you quote unquote have to buy your way onto those lists. I'm like a little naive here. And
you really are bursting a lot of bubbles. You do know that, right?
It asked me to be real.
No, absolutely. I agree with you.
And so, so you have this fabulous TED Talk, and now you have a book, and everyone's buying it, but when you read the book, there's nothing in there. So my advice is, stay in your lane. Do what you do really well.
Mm-hmm.
I do a ton of writing because I'm really good at it. I do some speaking. I'm really good at it, but, I don't think I'm going to make my livelihood there. It's not where I want to be.
Yeah, it's interesting because, there are few people I know who are more prolific than I am. You are definitely one of them. Lolly Daskell is another one who's a good friend of ours, and she writes 60 articles a month. She's, I'm sitting with her and I having coffee in New York. We're hanging out, and she's telling me this, and I go, and you have a full-time coaching practice, and you speak, and you train, and you do all these things, and she's like, yeah. I'm like, wow, it's amazing, but getting that much done, and like I said, I write a lot, but I know my greatest strength is speaking. It's not writing. It's something I've learned to do, but I think one of the key things around writing is this, just as a little sidebar tip for helping leaders, because I think that all leaders, this is my opinion, all leaders, don't care what you are, CEO, CFO, or even a manager, you need to write and you need to speak. You got to do both.
Because that makes you magnetic. And when you're out there and you're speaking, people come up to you and say, wow, I really like what you had to say. I would love to come work for you. So I think you really hit upon that.
Yeah, so you got to have both of those skills. But as you said, there are different ways of doing that. I don't write grammatically perfect. I don't write like an English teacher. And I remember 20 years ago thinking, well, maybe a little bit longer, but thinking I couldn't write because my spelling was terrible, my grammar was worse. And then somebody said to me, there's these little trolls, they live under a bridge, they're called editors.
Oh, yeah.
And I went,
totally.
oh, really? And so it's like, now I have a red editor who completely captures my voice, who doesn't change it. It still is, and everybody who reads my book says it feels like you're talking to me. that is my strength. And I think there are people who are writers who are weak in speaking who need to learn how to translate that, because being a leader is actually, for me, I mean, I think you've got to have the strategic skills. You know, you went and did your MBA, you did all those great things. That's wonderful. Congratulations, you know how to do all those things. But if people can't relate to you,
right,
if people can't connect with you, you're about as magnetic as a cold pancake. I mean, there's just nothing going on. And that's part of it. And so, you know, in a lot of what you're speaking about, for me, is what I call the concrete soft skills. These are the things that you need outside of the strategic and the technical. And I think that even as leaders, we know that, but we fight hard on the technical side, and we go, well, I should have got the raise, or I should have got the promotion because I've got this experience and I hit that target and I did those things. Yeah, but nobody likes you. You're an ass.
Well, you know, you really hit upon a key point, even with your own work. And you said, you know, I realized these were my weaknesses, and I got help, and I got an editor. And so, you know, I think that almost every magnetic leader that I spoke with mentioned to me somewhere in the conversation a coach they had worked with or a mentor that they had. I don't think any of them got there alone. And, you know, I have a mentor. I work with a mentor. Yeah. I have worked with coaches. I have an editor. I mean, it's impossible to be good at everything. And so what I find happens is people get stuck. And so if they're not great writers, they'll take, you know, 2 hours to write a blog post. I can put one up in 20 minutes, period. We're done. But if I want it to be perfect, and it's a blog, so I don't think it has to be, but if I'm writing something for the New York Times, I will send it to my editor because, quite frankly, I don't care where the commas go. Here, make it look nice, make it sound great. Here are my thoughts. And, you know, I'm getting better because I take their advice and I'm like, oh, I like to use that word that a lot. I'll look at my writing and I'll have the word, you know, and then that, and, you know, so you sort of, after a while, if you have a good editor, they'll say, you know, you seem to do that a lot. See, here I am. And you modify. But the key point that you raised is if you need help, you really need to ask for it. And I think what people don't understand is that the most successful clients that I work with are the ones who are at the top of their game, and they still have help.
Yeah, you know, the idea that and we grew up with it, but the idea that a leader knows it all is so foolish, and that great leaders know that they don't know it all, mm-hmm. and that they're willing to look at, okay, that's not my strength. Mm-hmm. I can remember when websites and all that first started, the, you know, online things. I'm the guy. I learned how to do all those things, and I learned how to build the site and do all those things. And now I have a team who does that, and they tell me something, and I go, I don't even know what you're talking about.
I don't want to know what you're talking about.
And I don't want to know what you're talking about. It's like, that's way too much work for me. Again, where are your strengths, and understanding that? And there's nothing magnetic about a leader who is micromanaging.
Oh, please don't. That's a whole nother book. But what you reminded me of is that I actually last year saw Jane Fonda. She was speaking after one of her films had come out. And she said, I think she said at the age of 78 or 79, I think that's how old she is, she said she had just hired her first acting coach. And I thought, my word, like Jane Fonda thinks she needs a coach. If she needs a coach, we all need one.
Exactly.
Unbelievable. At that age, to just say to yourself, I can be better, to me, is like, I'd rather get that message at 39, 29, but apparently at least the light went off for her. But
that, I think, is where the egoic side gets in the way of leadership. How many are willing to openly say, they might say it inside their head, but openly say, I can be better. You know, and not from a sense of self-beratement, but from a place of, I'm doing great. Wonder what the next level is. As opposed to, I'm crap and I'm beating the crap out of myself and saying I could.
I gotta tell you, I mean, Tom Brady has like 5 coaches. I mean, you would think like he couldn't get any better. So I look at that and I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty good. I could be better. And you're absolutely right. So I don't think any of us, I think every one of us could benefit from just having an outside perspective and telling us, especially as a leader, sometimes we think, oh my God, am I going crazy or what? Is it me? No, it's not you. And I have coached a lot of leaders who have hired me privately, and I have said, you need to get the heck out of that company. It is toxic. It is not working for you. Mm-hmm. So, sometimes you're in it and you're like, oh, this is normal, and it's not.
But that's a great point right there. I think that we normalize very often toxic environments, and so we become toxic inside of a toxic environment. I mean, the example I've given, very graphic for folks, plug your ears if you're easily offended, but if you drop a turd in a barrel of water, the entire barrel of water is poisoned now. There's only one turd in there, but you are going to poison the whole water. And anybody you feed from that water is toxic. And I think but at the same time, you can take that same water with that in there and drop something in there that's spectacularly beautiful, and it is now toxified. So if you put a person or a leader into an environment that's toxic, eventually that person is going to become toxified. The challenge is that we normalize the environment. And we say, but it's just one little turd. Well, what if that turd is the boss?
Well, we see that going on right now in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, these companies that have really become toxic in many ways, and it's, it feels normal.
Yeah, the normalization of a toxic environment is, part of the challenge is, this is what I love about millennials, that they are willing to walk away, and I love that about them. But I think in my generation, we just went, oh, that's what I have to put up with because it's the boss, and then there's a perpetuation of that toxification. So it's like, I'm in a toxic environment now. I'm the leader of the toxic environment, so I have to be toxic. That's the style of leadership.
But in your defense, when you were in that environment, I think unemployment was maybe 12%. Yep. Today it's at 3.2 in my area. I'm in Boston. It's nationally in the low 4s. I mean, come on. I mean, if we could have gotten up and walked across the street and had 3 job offers, we probably would have left. But we didn't. That was not our reality. Our reality was, you're lucky to have a job. Sit down, shut up, and do it. Yeah.
But this is one of the things that I think that leaders have really got to get, that I don't think that they really understand yet, is you are not the only option. You're not only the only option, you're not even the best option. No matter how well you think you're paying them, they will get up and walk away, and it won't be for a foosball table.
And remember, I mean, I don't know about you, but I know when I was going through the ranks, I mean, being on unemployment, my God, that was like, you were embarrassed. Today, it's no big deal. Oh, okay, well, I'm getting unemployment. Like, it's no big deal. So if you are not enjoying where you are and you get fired, or you negotiated package, which includes unemployment, you're like, oh, you're on Facebook letting everyone know you're collecting. Yeah. So you are totally right. And I think leaders need to understand that they are no longer anyone's only option.
Yeah, absolutely right. One of the things you talk about in your book is how magnetic leaders charge through sticky performance issues. Walk us a little bit through that one, if you would, please, Roberta.
Well, why don't you give me an example of a sticky performance issue that you've seen?
Well, let's say that somebody is doing well. They do well in all kinds of things, but let's go the other side for a minute. Let's say that they are great people. We get along well with everybody. However, they don't hit the targets. The numbers. They're not hitting the numbers. And this is a lovely person. This is a great person. They get along well with people. They work well with people, but they're not hitting that target. They're not hitting that performance. How would a magnetic leader deal with that?
Well, I think first the leader has to look at the processes, and first they have to ask themselves, is that target achievable?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else is able to achieve it, then the answer is yes.
Right.
If just come up with some random number like, oh, you should increase your revenues by 50% this year. Good luck, even though we cut your territory in half.
Right.
So first and foremost, is it achievable, the target? Am I giving that person the support they need? And most importantly, are they really capable of achieving that level?
Right.
And if they're not, then you are not doing them a service by keeping them in that job, because I can guarantee you they're going home every day, they're feeling defeated, they don't feel like they're doing a great job. And believe it or not, most people don't wake up and come to work every day saying, I'm going to do a crappy job.
No.
And so you owe it to them to help them find a way to find something that's more appropriate.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. What do you think is the most practical thing a C-suite leader can do with what it is you've been sharing with us today on the show? What's the big takeaway that they, okay, I got to go do this?
I think the big takeaway is I've got to go look at myself as a leader, and I have to ask my people, would they recommend my department as a place to work?
Mm.
If they hesitate for even a second, if they're not like, oh my God, of course. If they're like, well, right then and there, you've got your answer. That's like not a yes. And then you need to ask, what would it take for you to immediately say absolutely? Mm-hmm. And then you have to shut up. Because they're going to start to tell you some things that you don't want to hear. And you can't be, well, that's not really true. Or, well, what about this? Or I did this for you. Like, you have to just shut up, take some notes, say thank you, and be willing to be open to hearing that feedback. And then you have to figure out how you're going to make those changes.
Yeah, I think that is one of the traits of a great leader.
It is.
The ability to www.zipit.com.
Probably explains why I wasn't a great leader in those days.
Well, you talked about being 24, and I can remember being 23 and was certain I was the most enlightened person I'd ever met. And now, and when I got to 33, I was like, what a schmuck I was. And then I got to 43 and looked back at 33 and went, damn, I was still a schmuck. 53, I look back at 43, I was doing better, but there's always a look back, and that's why this is an important question. How could I do better? This is why great leaders always have a team of people around us. You talked about Tom Brady, you talked about Jane Fonda. Back in the day, when Tiger Woods was at the top of his game, he always had 5 coaches. Now, not one of them could play golf better than him.
Right.
But they all could do something in a way that he couldn't. And what was that? They could see what he couldn't see. And that's why they hire people like yourself. That's why they hire people like me. Because, I've worked with billionaires. I've never been one.
Not yet.
Not yet. But I can see what they can't see. You work, as do I, you work with CEOs who are CEOs for Fortune 500 organizations. Have you been the CEO of a Fortune 500 organization?
Not yet.
No. But the point is that objectivity, plus our skill set, plus all of our knowledge, it gives us that ability. And I think that smart leaders understand that. And this is a vitally important piece. I want to ask you a little bit more of a personal question here. Here's what I believe. Not the truth, just what I believe. What I believe is the most successful people I've ever met, and this is an idea for a book that I'm working on right now and I'm doing some notes on it, is that the most successful people I've met are people who are obsessed. Everybody I've met who's successful is obsessed. They're obsessed with something. Sometimes they have a dark obsession, sometimes they have a light obsession, but they have obsessions. But when we're obsessed with something. It means that if there's a conversation going on about that thing, we can't resist talking about it. If it comes on in a movie, it's the part of the movie we talk about. If there's a TV show about it, we got to watch it. If there's an article, we got to read it. Even if there's a conversation going on and it's not really appropriate to that conversation, but it leads in, we got to jump in. What's your obsession? Because you're very successful. What's your obsession?
my obsession is conversations about workplace issues and bad bosses. If I'm at a restaurant and I overhear somebody like behind me, I'm like ready to take a book out and kind of hand it to him and say, give this to your boss, or, it's just my obsession. I just feel like life's too short and that really, we can do better. All of us, we can do better. And so, you go to work every day, you should be happy. And if you're not, then you need to give your boss my book, The Magnetic Leader.
I think you just came up with the title of your next book, which is Life's Too Short to Deal with Crappy Bosses.
I like your turd thing. I might work with that.
That's okay. You enjoy.
I have a title. I'll call it Oh Crap.
There you go. So tell us, what's the one thing you hope more than anything? So obviously it's going to be short, but what's the one thing you hope more than anything they will put on your gravestone?
Oh, boy. She lived life to the fullest.
Okay. So let's lead that into my final question, which is this. There are many times in our lives when the lights are on and we feel on fire and we're passionate about things. But there are other times when, it's pretty dark and life is tough and, I don't know, you can't deal with your contractors and you're building your house and they cut a hole in the floor you don't want, or and your publisher's behind and your teenage kids are doing crap that drives you crazy. On those days when all of that arrives on the same day, on those mornings when it would be far easier to pull the blankets over your head and just hide, what gets you out of bed?
My dog. He has to be walked.
I was talking about on an internal level, but thank you for that.
Because he's like, take me out, take me out. That's one day of many. I mean, there's so many really good days, and so I try to focus on those really good days, and I try to be grateful for what I have. I mean, it was always a dream of mine to build a home, and I've done it. Yes, it turned into a nightmare. That's okay, but I'm lucky to have done it and to have had that experience.
Right. That's wonderful. Thank you. Please tell our listeners and our viewers where they can find out more about you, where they can find out more about your new book, and how to reach out to you. And again, please give that address for the report as well. Take your time, enjoy, let everybody know, because you've given great stuff and we want to make sure they get value from it.
Well, I actually welcome comments. So anyone who wants to reach out to me, the email is Roberta@Matuson, Matuson consulting.com. You can go to my website, MatusonConsulting.com. You can send me a LinkedIn invitation. I'm not that selective. But if you send me a note, I'll definitely accept. And you can follow me on Twitter @Matuson. Or if you're in Boston, just look me up.
Okay, cool. And the book is out. It's available.
Yes.
You can find it on Amazon and everywhere else.
It's actually right here.
Okay. Bring it into the center so we can see it. Let me see it. Let me see it. There you go. The Magnetic Leader. You need to get that. So reach out to that. So Roberta, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been wonderful to have you on the show. It's been terrific. And, you and I definitely sing into the choir here. Definitely. And it's vitally important. And I say this to our listeners all the time. Please don't listen to this. It's a waste of time. Instead of listening, use it. Apply what you got here. It's vitally important. Become that magnetic leader. And, part of that, as we've talked about, is the need for you to be far more courageous, far more authentic. Stepping into those things is going to make you a far better leader on every possible level. Reach out to Roberta. As I said, she writes for all those different outlets. You can find her. Just Google her. There's the pages and pages and pages and pages and pages of stuff. And there's all of it's great value. So make sure you reach out to her, find out more about her. And as Roberta says, please feel free to write to her and let her know what you got out of this show and how you're going to use it. That is really important. So I want to thank you, Roberta, for joining us today. It's been wonderful to have you here. I want to thank you, dear listener, for being on, dear viewer, for being on with us. And remember that research consistently shows that the companies that get to the top and stay there are purpose-driven. If you're truly serious about having that laser beam clarity about your company's purpose and building a culture of high-performing, highly engaged, authentic leaders who are fiercely loyal, then reach out to me, Dov Baron, at fullmontyleadership.com, where we provide the essential leadership skills for today's good leaders who are committed to becoming the great leaders of tomorrow by growing your people and growing your bottom line. fullmontyleadership.com, providing you with the concrete soft skills to get your organization to the top and keep you there, because you can't outsource authenticity. I want to thank you for joining us today. My name is Dov Baron. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you could be better. This is Dov Baron, and I'm out.